Most people believe their mind is broken because they cannot focus, but the truth is simpler and more brutal. They have trained their brain to escape discomfort every few seconds, and now silence feels dangerous, boredom feels unbearable, and stillness feels like death. So they reach for their phone, for noise, for conversation, for scrolling, for anything that keeps them from facing the quiet room where their real self lives. And this addiction to distraction is not accidental. It is engineered by a world that profits from your fractured attention. Because a distracted mind is easy to control, easy to sell to, easy to manipulate. And most people never notice that they are not choosing distraction, they are obeying it, obeying tiny dopamine commands that say, look here, click here, escape now, until their day becomes a blur of half-finished tasks and forgotten intentions, and they wonder why they feel anxious, why they feel restless, why they feel tired without doing anything meaningful, because they have spent their energy reacting instead of directing. And the silent samurai understands that before flow state can ever be reached, the addiction must be seen clearly, not judged, not fought emotionally, just observed. The constant urge to check, to switch, to flee the present moment. And once you see it, you realize how weak the modern mind has become, not because it lacks intelligence, but because it has never been trained to stay in one place, to hold one thought, to sit inside one task long enough for depth to appear. And depth is where power hides. Depth is where skill sharpens. Depth is where identity is forged. But depth requires staying. Staying when it is boring. Staying when it is uncomfortable. Staying when nothing exciting happens. And this is why most never experience true focus, because they leave too early, always leaving before the mind settles, before the noise clears, before the inner blade becomes still. And the first step of the silent samurai is not chasing flow, but breaking the reflex to escape. Because flow is not something you enter, it is something that appears when distraction is no longer your master. When the distractions begin to lose their grip, something strange happens. The mind feels empty, restless, even frightened, because it has never been left alone without stimulation. And this is the first gate of flow, the discomfort zone where most turn back, where most decide this isn't working, not realizing they have finally reached the training ground. Because flow does not begin with calm, it begins with resistance, with the itch to stop, the urge to switch tasks, the voice saying this is pointless. And the silent samurai does not fight these voices, does not argue with them, does not try to feel motivated, but simply continues the action anyway, continues writing, continues practicing, continues building, with no emotional negotiation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mind begins to settle like dust falling in still air. Thoughts become fewer, movements become smoother, time starts to blur, not because peace has arrived, but because the mind has stopped wasting energy on internal debate. And this is the real entrance to flow, not excitement, not inspiration, but surrender to the task itself, a quiet agreement to stay no matter what. And in this stage, the work still feels heavy, the progress still feels slow, but the foundation is forming, neural pathways are aligning, attention is narrowing, the outer world fades slightly, and the samurai knows that this is where most people fail, not because they are incapable, but because they are impatient. They expect flow to feel good immediately. They expect focus to be comfortable, but real focus is forged in the moment you want to stop and do not. And this gate must be passed again and again, day after day, until staying becomes natural, until the mind learns that escape is no longer the default. And only then does the deeper current of flow begin to pull you forward. Beyond the first gate, beyond the resistance, beyond the itch to escape, lies a different territory, the deep current of flow, where the task is no longer something you are doing, but something you are inside of. And here, effort becomes lighter, movements become precise, decisions become instinctive, and the world feels sharpened, not peaceful, but clear, like a blade honed so thin it can cut silence itself. And the silent samurai recognizes that this state is not relaxation, it is heightened readiness, a mind fully present, fully engaged, with no wasted motion, no wandering thought, no internal chatter arguing about whether to continue, because continuation is assumed, automatic, unquestioned. And in this state, hours pass like minutes, fatigue disappears, doubt becomes irrelevant, and identity itself shifts from "I am trying" to "I am doing." And this is why flow is so rare, because it requires surrendering the ego's need to comment, to judge, to compare, to seek validation. And when those voices fade, only the task remains, pure and undiluted. And in this purity, skills sharpen faster, understanding deepens faster, output increases without strain, and the samurai learns that flow is not a gift, not luck, not talent, but a trained condition, a mental posture cultivated through repeated exposure to discomfort and refusal to escape. And once tasted, it becomes addictive in a different way, not the shallow addiction of distraction, but the deep addiction of mastery, the hunger to return to that state again, to carve deeper, to refine further, to become quieter, sharper, more precise with each session. Many mistake flow for a peaceful state, a meditative bliss, but the silent samurai knows better. Flow is not peace, it is precision, a ruthless alignment of mind, body, and intent toward a single point. And this precision demands discipline, not comfort, because in flow, every flaw in your process is exposed, every weakness in your skill becomes visible, and there is nowhere to hide, no distraction to mask incompetence, no noise to cover hesitation. And this is why most unconsciously avoid flow, because it reveals them to themselves. But the samurai welcomes this exposure, because only what is seen can be sharpened, and so each session becomes a mirror, showing exactly where attention breaks, where technique slips, where emotional control wavers, and slowly, through repetition, these gaps close, not through motivation, not through inspiration, but through quiet correction, again and again, until the movements are clean, the thought patterns efficient, the reactions measured, and this precision spills beyond the task into life itself. Speech becomes slower, decisions become firmer, emotional outbursts become rare, because the mind has learned to hold steady pressure without collapsing. And in a world of scattered minds, the precise mind becomes dangerous, not loud, not flashy, but lethal in its effectiveness, like a sword that doesn't swing wildly, but strikes exactly where intended. At a certain point, focus stops being something you practice and becomes something you carry, and this is where flow turns into weaponized focus, a state where you can enter deep work on command, ignore noise without effort, detach from emotional turbulence without suppression, and direct your attention like a laser instead of a floodlight. And the silent samurai understands that this is real power in the modern age, because while others react to notifications, opinions, trends, and drama, you remain anchored in your chosen path, immune to distraction storms. And this immunity is not accidental, it is trained through thousands of small refusals to escape, thousands of returns to the task, thousands of hours spent alone with your craft, your body, your mind. And gradually, people notice something different about you, not because you announce it, but because your presence feels grounded, your speech feels measured, your actions feel deliberate, and they cannot explain why, but they sense it, the aura of someone who is not pulled by every wind. And this weaponized focus does not mean you are always in flow, but it means you know the road to it, you can walk it at will. And that alone separates builders from spectators, creators from the crowd. In the end, flow state is not a mystical achievement, not a permanent condition, not a personality trait. It is a discipline of returning to the work, returning to the present, returning to the single point again and again until the mind obeys without negotiation. And this obedience is the true edge of the silent samurai, because while others wait for motivation, you move without it. While others wait for peace, you cultivate precision. While others announce their plans, you disappear into practice, and eventually results appear, quietly, undeniably, without explanation. And by the time the world notices, you have already passed the invisible phase, already forged your focus, already shaped your mind into a blade. And you understand that flow was never the goal. It was the byproduct of a deeper transformation, the transformation from someone who reacts to life into someone who directs it, silently, steadily, without needing applause, without needing validation, without needing noise. And this is the path of the silent samurai, not peace, but precision.
Most people think mastery is about staying consistent, but the silent samurai knows consistency is not perfection. It is returning after failure, returning after distraction, returning after boredom, returning after doubt, because the real battle is not in never breaking focus, but in refusing to stay broken. And every time the mind drifts and you bring it back, you are strengthening the attention muscle. Every time you skip a session and show up the next day anyway, you are reinforcing identity. Every time you feel resistance and continue regardless, you are training obedience within yourself. And this quiet discipline of returning is invisible to the world, but undeniable in results. Because while others collapse after missing one day, 1 week, 1 attempt, you simply step back onto the path without drama, without guilt, without stories. And this is what separates amateurs from warriors. Not constant intensity, but relentless return, again and again, like a blade being sharpened stroke by stroke, never rushed, never emotional, just inevitable. The world fears solitude because solitude exposes. It removes distraction, removes audience, removes external reward, and leaves only you and the task. And this is why most cannot stay alone with their work for long. They need feedback, encouragement, recognition, or at least noise to feel real. But the silent samurai understands that solitude is not loneliness, it is a performance enhancer. Because only in solitude can you enter true flow without interruption. Only in solitude can you hear subtle mistakes. Only in solitude can you build without distortion. And as hours spent alone accumulate, something powerful happens. You become less dependent on external energy, less reactive to social emotion, less influenced by opinions, and your focus becomes self-sustaining, self-fed, self-contained. And when you later step into public space, you carry this centered gravity with you, because you have trained in the place where no one claps, and therefore applause cannot control you. Modern culture worships multitasking, but the silent samurai sees it clearly. Multitasking is the art of doing everything poorly while feeling busy, a performance for others rather than progress for self. Because every time you split attention, you fracture depth, you weaken memory, you dilute presence, and your mind becomes a marketplace instead of a temple. And flow cannot exist in fragmentation. Precision cannot exist in chaos. So the samurai chooses monotasking as a discipline, doing one thing fully, completely, without dividing awareness. And at first this feels slow, because scattered minds mistake chaos for speed. But over time, depth outpaces surface, quality outpaces quantity. And the one who can hold a single point of focus longer than others quietly surpasses them all, not through talent, but through undivided presence. Most people obey their emotions like commands. If they feel tired, they stop. If they feel bored, they escape. If they feel doubtful, they quit. But the silent samurai learns to see emotions as weather, passing conditions, not directives. And this shift changes everything, because flow requires staying through emotional fluctuations, staying when excitement fades, staying when frustration rises, staying when confidence dips. And once emotions lose their authority, discipline becomes natural, because action no longer requires the correct feeling. And this is the secret behind those who seem unstoppable. They are not always motivated, they are simply not controlled by their moods. And this emotional independence is what allows focus to remain stable, steady, precise, even when the inner climate changes. Flow appears easier when the body recognizes the doorway, and the silent samurai creates rituals not for superstition, but for conditioning, small, repeated behaviors that signal the mind. Now we enter the work. Now we sharpen the blade. Now we become still. And over time, lighting the same lamp, wearing the same headphones, sitting in the same posture, breathing in the same rhythm becomes a trigger that bypasses hesitation, bypasses negotiation, and drops you into readiness faster, because the mind learns through repetition, not through willpower. And this is why rituals matter, not because they are magical, but because they make discipline automatic. And when entry becomes easy, flow becomes frequent. In the end, the silent samurai is not the most talented, not the loudest, not the most confident, but the one who stays longest in the work, who returns the most times, who depends the least on emotion, who needs the least external validation. And in a world obsessed with speed, visibility, and noise, this quiet endurance becomes unstoppable advantage, because while others burn bright and fade, you progress steadily and remain. While others chase inspiration, you build inevitability. And years later, when results appear undeniable, people will call it overnight success, luck, or giftedness, never realizing it was simply the compound effect of silent focus repeated daily, without audience, without applause, without peace, but with precision. Most people believe they lack discipline or intelligence when they fail to focus, but the real problem is simpler. Their brain has been trained to escape discomfort instantly, again and again, every day, through phones, social media, constant noise, and endless stimulation. And over time, this creates an addiction to distraction, where the mind cannot stay with one task without searching for relief. And this is not a personal weakness, it is a conditioned habit built by an environment designed to harvest attention for profit, because a distracted person is easier to influence, easier to sell to, easier to control. And when you cannot control your attention, you cannot control your life. So the silent samurai begins by noticing this addiction without self-hate, simply observing how often the hand reaches for the phone, how quickly boredom appears, how silence feels uncomfortable. And this observation is the first act of discipline, because once you see that distraction is automatic, you realize focus is not about forcing yourself to concentrate, but about retraining the brain to tolerate stillness, boredom, and effort without escaping. And this retraining is the foundation of flow, because flow cannot exist in a mind that runs away every few seconds. So before precision, before mastery, before strength, the samurai breaks the invisible chain of distraction, one returned moment at a time. When you finally reduce distractions and sit with a single task, the first thing you feel is not focus, it is discomfort, restlessness, impatience, and self-doubt. And this stage is what most people misunderstand, because they expect focus to feel good immediately. But real focus begins with resistance, as the brain protests against losing its easy dopamine hits. And this moment becomes the first gate of flow, a psychological checkpoint where most quit and return to distraction, believing they are not made for deep work. But the silent samurai understands this resistance is proof that training has begun. So instead of fighting the feeling or trying to feel motivated, they simply continue the task anyway, writing even when it feels dull, practicing even when it feels pointless, working even when progress feels invisible. and slowly the brain starts adapting. Neural noise reduces, internal dialogue quiets, and attention begins to stabilize. And this is the true entry to flow, not sudden inspiration, but gradual mental settling, achieved through patience, repetition, and refusal to escape. And once this gate is crossed repeatedly, focus becomes less painful and more natural, and the mind learns a new default: stay instead of flee. After passing the resistance phase enough times, you begin to experience the deep current of flow, where attention locks on to the task and everything else fades into the background, not because you are relaxed, but because your mind is no longer divided. And in this state, thinking becomes clearer, movement smoother, decisions faster, and time strangely distorted. And this happens because the brain is no longer wasting energy on self-commentary, doubt, or comparison, but is fully invested in the present action. And this is where real skill improvement happens, because mistakes are noticed instantly, corrections happen naturally, and learning accelerates without conscious effort. And the silent samurai understands that this is not magic or talent, but a biological result of sustained focus. And once you taste this state, you realize most people live far below their mental capacity simply because they never stay with anything long enough to reach depth. And so returning to the deep current becomes a practice, a discipline, a chosen path. Many people imagine flow as a calm, peaceful, meditative feeling. But real flow is not about peace, it is about precision, because when your attention becomes sharp, every inefficiency in your method is exposed, every weakness in your skill becomes obvious, and there is nowhere to hide, which is why so many unconsciously avoid deep focus. It reveals their true level without illusion, and this can be uncomfortable, but the samurai welcomes